So a little bit about myself first. I'm Josh Gooley. I'm from Duke-NUS Medical School. I've been there for 10 years in the program in neuroscience and behavioral disorders. And my lab is within the Center for Cognitive Neuroscience. And so there are a small group of us who focus on trying to understand from a neuroscience kind of perspective, how can we learn better? How can we sleep better? Which happens to be my favorite area. I'm a sleep researcher. And so I joined ALSET recently, and I'm going to tell you about some of the directions I like to take our research theme, and I'll give you some examples of how I am going to be using the ALSET data lake in order to support my own research. So I'll just remind you that there are 4 different research themes under the Discovery unit of ALSET, and I'm heading up the neuroscience research theme, and these are the 2 kind of key objectives that I want to focus on during my time as the theme leader. So the first is to identify and characterize both biological and environmental factors that give rise to individual differences in cognitive performance, because we all know there are strong individual differences in every kind of human behavior, and so if we have a better insight into what's driving those individual differences, including individual differences in learning, then I think we can help students to actually become better learners by providing the tools that they need. And the second is to develop strategies and interventions that can then be used to improve learning through improving attention, memory, problem solving, and decision making, among other things. And so what I'm in the process of doing is building teams along these 3 sub-themes of the neuroscience theme. So one is to use cognitive neuroscience-inspired approaches to improve learning outcomes. The second is to understand the factors that influence cognition, which can range from like socioeconomic background to sleep behavior, to background, like what topic areas did the students study before they came to NUS. And the third, which I think is very important as well, is the mental state of students, because if you're not in a good state of mind to learn, then you're going to be learning less than you could potentially be doing so. So now I'm going to tell you about an ongoing project that is part of this Learning to Learn Better course. You heard about it already a little bit. So this is a course that Funman and Bob are heading up, and I've been an instructor as teaching the sleep component of the course, because poor sleep habits are a major impediment for learning. It affects both your ability to encode new information and also influences your memory consolidation. And so having good sleep habits is key to making sure that you're putting yourself in a position to learn better. And so in past years, I essentially took part in a pedagogical exercise of getting students to keep track of their sleep behavior for a week. And then when they came back, I gave some summary data about, okay, this is what your sleep behavior is like. This is what, ideally what your sleep behavior might look like. This is what we know about short sleep and its impact on learning, etc. But this year, we've taken a different approach, and now we're actually using this course as a test bed for research. And so this time around, we got IRB approval to do a proper study as part of the course, in which we've outfitted all of our participants, or students, they're both actually, right, with actigraphy watches, so that we can have a readout of their sleep behavior early in the course and then later on in the course. And the basic idea is, because we're collecting the sleep behavior early in the course, that's before they get all this exposure to good learning strategies and why sleep is important. And then 2 weeks from now, we'll be putting the watches on them for a second week of monitoring, so we can see if there's any kind of influence of the course on their sleep behavior. And of course, our hope is that, at least in the short term, that they'll show improvements in their sleep duration and regularity of their sleep timing. But it goes beyond that. So I'm collecting this data as a researcher, and all the data as of now are outside of the data lake. But eventually what we're going to be doing, once we have the data in and have analyzed it to completion, is we'll be merging it together with data that already exists in the data lake. And one of the goals that I have in mind is to try to see if we can come up with any kind of digital fingerprint of sleep behavior in students based on the different types of information that we can collect, including login times for their email, log-off times for their email, Wi-Fi usage, and IVLE logins and logouts. So we think if we combine that digital information together, that we might actually have a reasonable readout of sleep behavior that we can then use on a much larger scale. Because right now we're dealing with 60 students and characterizing them in quite some detail, but it's a very small group of students. But the hope is down the road that then we can come up with kind of a proxy for sleep behavior using their digital information that we can roll out in thousands of students at the same time. And this is actually a snapshot from earlier in the course. I think this was the second or third course of the semester. And these are the students from the Learning to Learn Better course lining up to get their actigraphy watch devices. And these are my staff essentially handing them out. So they've already done the pre-sleep learning tutorial assessment, and later on we'll get the post-measurement. Now there's also, so the psychology theme, as you might imagine, has a lot of research interests that overlap with the neuroscience research theme. And as part of this freshman survey, which several hundred students took this coming year, the first year students, we have a series of sleep-related questions. But in the questionnaire, there's much more than that, of course. There are questions about motivation, interest in learning, different types of learning styles, etc. And so one of the things that we'll be doing with that data set is trying to understand the relationship between sleep and motivation to learn. And then beyond that, we're also using the sleep-related questions to look at how people's sleep behavior may influence their choices during their 4 years or more at university. And just to give one example of this, one of our questions about sleep behavior asks about people's chronotype. So a chronotype is like your morning or evening preference. And so one of our hypotheses is that a person's chronotype will influence what courses that they want to take based on when they are offered. And so if you are an evening type, you may decide that you're not taking any morning courses unless they're absolutely required for your major. And so these are the kinds of questions that we can probe using the freshman survey data combined with other data that already exists in the data lake. Now, just to give an example of the type of data that we can generate, so these are data from an adolescent sleep habit survey, but we're collecting the same types of information from university students. And I just thought I'd highlight a couple of things relevant to learning. So, as you might recall from your days at university or secondary school, your sleep behavior was likely a bit different on school nights versus on weekends. And that's what this histogram shows here. So this is nocturnal sleep duration. And this is the percentage of adolescents who fall within each of the different sleep duration categories. So on school nights, our adolescents in Singapore are getting on average about 6.5 hours of sleep per night. And then the distribution shifts very strongly to the right on weekends, whereby the majority of students are reporting getting 9 hours or more of sleep at night. They're also napping on weekends, so they sleep a lot at night and they nap. So they're really trying to pay back the sleep debt that they've accumulated during the school week. Now, I imagine that there might be something similar going on in our university students, although they have more discretionary time over their sleep-wake behavior than do adolescents, although they have a lot more freedom over their bedtime than adolescents, which may drive very late bedtimes, which is pretty typical among university students. Now, in the same group of adolescents, we looked at what the impact might be on their daytime sleepiness. Of course, if you're sleepy during the daytime, this might impede your ability to learn, right? It's hard to pay attention. If you're groggy or if you're asleep, you can't learn at all. And so with shorter sleep durations, daytime sleepiness goes up. And so we'll be capturing this type of information too from the freshman survey. And I'll highlight one more project. Actually, I have two more projects here. So what I'm about to describe to you is another example of how I have my own research project funded independently, which I'm going to then take my data and eventually merge it back with the data lake. So I get more bang for my buck this way. And so what this study is doing is looking at the interaction between sleep behavior and study spacing on declarative memory performance. And so the basic idea is that over the course of 6 weeks, we'll have groups of students, 150 in total, who will be exposed to a learning paradigm where they have to come in every Friday over 4 consecutive Fridays to do studying. Now, there's some items that they'll be studying every Friday, and so that's the spaced learning condition. And then there are other items that are only learned during one learning session. So those are the crammed items. So if you think of like cramming for exams versus study spacing, we all know spacing is supposed to be better than cramming, but there's not a lot of objective data demonstrating in a kind of a real-world setting that this is the case. In the laboratory, it works fantastically. Now, 2 weeks later, sorry, I should mention that we get their short-term memory performance off after that 4th Friday, and then 2 weeks later we do a long-term memory recall test. And the basic expectation is that with cramming, it will be quite effective in the short term. So cramming works if you're testing shortly after cramming, but in the long run, the retention will be better for items that are spaced out. Furthermore, we expect that there will be an interaction with sleep behavior based on some laboratory-based data that we collected in the past, whereby students who have short sleep behavior over this period will be even worse in the off than the ones who have a healthy sleep pattern. And then one more project that's planned. A lot of this is planned because I came on board fairly recently, so if I speak again perhaps a year from now, maybe I can show some results from these studies that are all in the planning stages. The final one is screening for at-risk students. And so I'm quite interested in identifying traits that associate with negative learning outcomes, whether it be poor grades or missed school absenteeism, taking time off from school, etc. And so one of the things I'm quite interested in doing is developing screening tools to help us to identify these students very early on so that we can go in and intervene and help them out. And so we've done some sleep-related screening in adolescents. And so out of a 40-item questionnaire, we boil it down to 8 key questions that give us information about students' depression levels. And we're focusing on thoughts of self-harm as our major outcome. So essentially, if you fall into the yes category for any of these, and these aren't the actual questions, I've just kind of condensed it so it's easier to understand. But if you were to say yes on these 8 items, we can compile a score, 1 to 8, or 0 to 8, that gives us information about the student's mental well-being. And this is, again, based on the adolescent survey that we did in Singapore. But these are the scores. So if you had 0, then there's a 10% chance that the student would have thoughts of self-harm over the past 2 weeks. But you can see that with increasing score, the percentage goes up. And if you have 4 yeses out of 8, then there's a greater than 50% chance that the adolescent has had thoughts of self-harm or suicide over the past 2 weeks. And these are the odds ratios compared to if you have a score of 0. So essentially, if you have a score of 4 or higher, the odds of having self-harm thoughts are about 12-fold higher compared to if you have a score of 0, which would be essentially a very healthy sleep pattern. So we're looking to do something kind of along these lines in undergraduates as well. We might have to change the parameters a little bit because these are in adolescents, but the basic idea I think you can appreciate, that we're looking to find ways of getting insight into student mental health without actually asking them about their mental health, right? So this is key. If we're just giving a sleep questionnaire, they're more likely to be honest and upfront about their sleep behavior than they are about, yeah, I'm feeling really depressed and I'm having thoughts of self-harm. And so with that, I hope that gives you kind of a sampling of the types of studies that one can do and how you can have your own studies running on the side that eventually merge with the data lake, or you can conduct studies that are based entirely on data that are already in the data lake, or data that will eventually be added to the data lake. So I'm happy to take any questions.